first episode of the Embodied Podcast, addressing secondhand. I am Felix, one of your hosts. My fellow Central St. Martin student and co-host, Grace, will be joining us later in this episode. In this series, we will highlight different experiences of shopping in the secondhand consumer space in the pursuit of sustainability. Today, we will be talking to Jasmine Beach, one of the senior managers at Peckham Car Boot, and through our conversation in this episode, we will investigate size inclusivity and accessibility to in-person and online secondhand clothes shopping. Thank you for tuning in for this episode, and we hope you enjoy. First question. How do you navigate sustainable shopping?
I tend to focus on secondhand clothing because it's more sustainable than fast fashion, but it can be really difficult to find plus size options. So I try to use charity shops, vintage stores, car boot sales, which are obviously quite good when you live in London, and online marketplaces. But I often find myself having to be quite strategic and remembering stores that I know stock larger sizes, or if I can rely on certain searches or certain online marketplaces, their searches aren't great, they'll include other sizing, and that could be really difficult and upsetting sometimes. So I find myself finding it quite difficult to navigate sustainable shopping sometimes, and I find myself really holding on to pieces and finding difficulty letting go of pieces that fit well, and will get pieces fixed and mended many times over, even if they are way too old and they should probably just be gotten rid of. But I know that I'll struggle to find something that fitting that I like in the same way again.
Second question. Do you prefer in-person or online secondhand shopping, and why?
I tend to prefer online secondhand shopping because you feel like there's more of a variety, especially of sizing. Many in-person shops that often secondhand clothing don't tend to stock many plus size options, and if they do, the selection is usually quite small or outdated, or somebody's nan's clothes which I'm not particularly interested in wearing. The thing about online platforms is they do allow you to filter by size and find pieces from different sellers. Focusing more on inclusive sizing also helps you to be able to find, obviously, people with similar bodies to you, and then you can follow their page and buy more stuff from them. So somebody who's interested in size inclusive clothing, or personally is just the same size as you. Obviously, it has its downsides. There's inconsistent sizing, no option to try things on, people constantly labelling as, look how amazing this would look, oversized, which can be really difficult to hear when oversized just means your normal clothing size. But in person, when I'm at car boots, which I work at a car boot, and so do have a vested interest in sustainable clothing and finding secondhand pieces, I tend to try and find people who look like me. I mean, it doesn't always work, obviously, style-wise, and obviously people who aren't the same size as me do have clothes that would fit me, but that tends to be where I first look, to try and look at the people who are selling the clothes and see, oh, are they likely to have clothes that would fit me because they are similar size to me.
So, third question. Do you think the secondhand shopping sphere, in person and online, is accessible, and why?
Not really, to be honest. I do think there is a conscious effort trying to be made online that is to up accessibility 100%, which is really amazing. But especially in person, charity shops and vintage clothes shops and any kind of second-hand clothing tends to prioritise straight size clothing, and even when larger sizes are donated, they might not always make it onto the shop floor in the same mass amounts. Also, a lot of charity shops and second-hand clothing shops organise clothes by category or colour or something else rather than doing it by size, or they don't have the sizing indicators on the hangers. And when you're a plus size person who knows that going into a shop there's probably going to be very little clothes, it makes it even harder when you then have to scour through everything to try and find something your size and that you may like, and that might not, that it makes it more unlikely to occur. So I also find that often when I do go secondhand clothing buying, I tend to look more for accessories or shoes, like in the solace of places where I'm not going to be told by the clothes that I'm too big and won't fit in them. And I think also there's such a lack of representation in secondhand clothing shops. Most marketing and imagery is centered on smaller bodies, and models and mannequins will be on smaller bodies because they think this will appeal to more of a mass market than if they put larger sizes in the windows. Some charity shops, secondhand clothing stores have started making plus size areas, which is really great. And I think there's definitely an improvement, but obviously comes with its own difficulties because some people find it difficult to go into a separate section of a shop and admit to themselves that they have to shop at another part of the store. So it's definitely not accessible, but there are ways that they're changing, and there's some people who are doing some great things where they do secondhand clothing for plus size people, like car boots and markets, especially for plus size people, and like fat clothing swaps, etc., which is really great to see. There was like plus size closet sale run by someone called Alessia Golfetto, which was called Thick Threads, and it was basically all for plus size clothing, and also had a feature on a lot of people of colours, like body sizing as well, and inclusivity there, which, and it was just like really amazing to see because I just haven't really ever seen anything like that before. So that's really great. So there is like ways that this is changing in communities and groups who are deciding like it's not accessible and we want to make a space where it is, and that's just so incredible to see, because obviously part of this problem is also, and spaces like this also do remind us that there are people whose bodies are more associated with being larger, and it's also worth remembering within those spaces who are associating with having larger bodies because of many historical reasons, and tends to be women of colour, and how if we have inaccessible spaces, secondhand clothing spaces, how that will affect women of colour too, and that's a double oppression on size and also on race, and that just is something that really needs to be remembered within this conversation.
What do you think, if anything, could be implemented for a better secondhand shopping experience?
Specifically for those for plus-sized inclusivity, I think secondhand shops should make a real conscious effort to stock and display plus-size clothing. So rather than just assuming it won't sell, or even if it's not because of that, if they don't want to stock it, unpacking that and go, why are we not wanting to stock this, or why do we feel like this won't sell as well, and what does that say about the people we want wearing our clothes? So I think introducing a dedicated section for larger sizes is important. There are charity shops doing this, but I do think it is something that really needs to occur more. And I think online platforms can improve search functions, offer more size inclusive filtering, and encourage more diverse sellers, not even just sellers who are plus size, but for people who do reselling, etc., to include plus size clothing in that. I think that would be really important. And also having, with size inclusive filtering, not having any other sizes show up except the ones you selected, because that can be really frustrating. And definitely like just more visibility and representation of plus size people in secondhand fashion spaces, whether in advertising, collaborations, or shop layouts, like would also just help make sustainable shopping so much more inclusive. And there are, of course, like limits to how much you can do that, especially with resellers and vintage clothing brands where clothes were tended to be a lot smaller, like a lot of Italian designer, etc. But also questioning why we want to focus on brands that have excluded large people so much, and trying to find alternative brands that haven't done that in the same case.
listening to the first episode of the Embodied Podcast. We hope you tune in again next week when we'll be discussing navigating secondhand clothes through the lens of the trans community.